Welcome to another episode of Seeing Them Live, a podcast featuring memorable concert stories from live music fans. Everyone has a concert story, and hopefully, one day, we'll hear yours.
There was a guy playing drums and a guy playing guitar and another guy playing bass. I recognized the four strings on the bass because I was interested in playing an upright bass. And on the drum head, it said the Kingbees. And I remember running home, running downstairs. My mom was doing the laundry in the basement of one of those tub washing machines. And I said, Mom, I've got to figure it out. Because, you know, people used to always ask, you'd have aunts and stuff, what do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to do when you grow up, right? I didn't want to say fireman or policeman. I said, I know what I want to do when I grow up, Mom. I want to be a king bee. Because they started playing and poof, it blew my mind, man.
Today's guest is Jamie James. Jamie is a guitarist, singer, and songwriter, known for his work with Dennis Quaid and the Sharks, and he's also collaborated with the late actor Harry Dean Stanton. Jamie was also a member of the band The New Steppenwolf and was the frontman of the 80s rockabilly trio The Kingbees. He returns with new music, bringing his rich, rock-infused legacy to a new chapter. Jamie's new album is titled Straight Up and is a 10-track solo LP, and he reunites with his Dennis Quaid and the Sharks bandmates. The album is out now on Oglio Records and was released on March 14th, exactly 45 years after the Kingbees' debut release in March of 1980. Jamie, welcome to Seeing Them Live.
Oh, man, thank you for having me.
And I'm also joined today by my co-host and producer, Doug Florzak. And we'd also like to give a shout out to Mike at Earshot Media for arranging this interview with you today. We're really excited to have you on the podcast, and in doing research for this, man, I've got a lot of notes. You've done a lot of stuff, Jamie.
And I feel like I'm just beginning, man. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. So we start out usually with guests talking about concerts and stuff, but we definitely want to talk about your new album, of course. But instead of starting with a concert story, I heard in an interview, I think, we'll start with an instrument that you received for Christmas in 1966, if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yes, I do. First, though, thank you for your introduction, but the single came out on February the 14th, and the album's coming out on March 14th, just to be clear for your listeners on Oglio. That is correct. And the single was Let the Praying Begin. Anyway, in 1966, I grew up in Canada in Woodstock, Ontario. Oh, I was born in Toronto, and when I was 2, we moved to Woodstock. And so if you know anything about Southern Ontario, Canada, it's got 3 things it's known for: hockey, and more hockey. Okay, so you make a little rink, or at least your parents do, in your backyard, and you start skating before you go to kindergarten. Then that's no lie. And so I was into hockey. And in fact, my first time in the United States was to play hockey. Our little Pee Wee All-Star team, when I was 10, played the Detroit Rooster Tails, on which were these 2 brothers, Mark and Marty Howe, whose father was Gordie Howe. So we all got to meet Gordie Howe. At that time was a hockey legend, similar to Wayne Gretzky or Ovechkin of today or whatever, for those that follow hockey. But anyway, I blew out a knee by the time I was about 12 or 13, right? And the NHL scouts you young there. But anyway, so it destroyed my dreams of being a hockey player. And the next door neighbor had this woman, Connie. She had an old acoustic guitar. It only had 4 strings on it, and the copper binding was coming off. And I wanted to learn. I just picked it up by ear, Batman. I remember learning da 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 da, right? Like learning Batman. And because the copper binding was unraveling, it would make my fingertips bleed, but I didn't care. And as soon as I figured out Batman going up and down, back and forth, I went downstairs and I played it for my sister and my brothers, and I went outside in the backyard and put anybody that was listen, and I loved it. And so I started to learn that. I learned Wipeout. I learned a couple of basic, simple things. And then I moved up to House of the Rising Sun by the Animals. It was a brand new song out at the time, pretty much. And I begged my mom, although we didn't have the money really for a guitar and an amp that I saw in this store called the Big M It was just a store that sold everything from furniture to licorice. And sure enough, there it was for Christmas. And so, man, I played that thing every day after school, all weekend long. It became my life. And I had a little record player. And in those days, you know, what I learned from one of my other guitar player buddies at school, and there was only three of us in the school that played guitar, is if you tape a quarter to the record arm, you could slow the tempo down so you have more of a chance of learning, you know, the guitar parts on the record. So that's what I did. Yeah.
Yeah, so you listed as your first concert, then shortly thereafter, you pick up this new guitar as a Christmas gift. You see Tommy James and the Shondells.
That's right. Hanky Panky was one of the first songs I learned. And they were coming to our town to play the fairgrounds. You know,
Oh,
most small towns in those days had like fairgrounds for the fair in the 2 weeks, you know, of the summer or whatever, you know, and they would get bands coming through to play. And yes, Tommy James and Shondells came through, and I was able to get in there. I think I probably snuck in. There was a little hole in the back fence there. And man, it just blew my mind. It blew my mind, you know, blew my mind.
yeah, because you list that then as a four-way tie for some of your best concerts. And you listed after that Tommy James and the Shondells show. You saw like a year later Deep Purple in 1968.
Yeah, for the Hush had just come out, and they were playing in a town 30 miles away called London, Ontario, Wonderland Gardens, I think it was called. And again, I probably snuck into that somehow. I don't know. I hitchhiked there, I'm sure. And I worked my way right to the front, and I stood right at Richie Blackmore's feet. And I watched him, and I could see Ian Pace right there, and then John Lord on the other side of the stage. Richie Blackmore was on stage left, so on my right, if you're facing the stage. And I can't remember the singer they had. I think it was the original guy. I don't remember, but I was more interested in drums, the Ian Pace and when John Lord just pounding the organ and Richie Blackmore. And at one point, man, he was playing a white Stratocaster with a rosewood neck. So probably in early 60s through a Marshall stack. And at one point he takes his guitar, dude, and he threw it in the air and it twirled and it came down and he caught it and he didn't miss a beat. They were so exciting live back then. It was amazing.
That sounds awesome. And then the next year, you see Sly and the Family Stone on their Stand tour, I think.
It was at the University of Toronto. This was in Toronto. This was probably in July of '69. Either probably just a week or two before they did the thing that's out on Netflix now in Harlem. And it was Sly. Well, Sly I think was the headliner, but on that bill was also well, I think they had Johnny Winter. It's the first time I saw Johnny Winter. He blew my mind, and a few other really good acts. But man, when Sly came out and their show was so tight then, and Larry Graham got a sound on the bass like I'd never heard before. And I played an upright bass in school. I'd been playing an upright bass in the orchestra because I'm tall. Man, oh man, that was mind blowing. It was fantastic, fantastic.
Yeah. And then after that, a couple years later, you see The Who on their Who's Next tour.
That's right. Yeah, at the Oval Cricket Ground, I think it was in 1971, and it was the concert in London that was akin to George Harrison's one to raise money for Bangladesh, and at the Oval Cricket Ground, and it was well, Rod Stewart and the Faces came on just before The Who, and then before Rod Stewart and the Faces, and Rod had a hit at the time, Maggie May, and, so he was very popular, and then also, Mott the Hoople, and before that, Atomic Rooster, and, a group called Quintessence, and I can't remember some of the others. It was like a date, all day type thing. And then The Who came on at the end. It was funny because Rod Stewart made a comment going, "Well, just about to show The who the best band in London is." And he did get a good response, right? But that was a dumb thing to say at that time because when The Who came on, my friend, they blew it's just they just blew everything away. It was phenomenal. Phenomenal.
I can only imagine. I've seen footage from that period of time.
Yeah, you can look it up. I haven't seen visual footage, but I've heard audio of the Who at the Oval Cricket Ground in London. I think it was 1971, maybe 72, but I'm pretty sure it was 71.
So were you living in London then, Jamie?
Yes, I was. I lived there for 2 years.
Okay, because you'd mentioned that your most surprising concert was about a year after that, where you saw this band that you didn't really ever have heard of before called Queen in London as well, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I used to go out and see music. At that time, I needed to pay my rent because I went over there to with some songs I had written and my little guitar. I went over there in 1971 because my mother, well, my girlfriend lived over there at that time. So I wanted to see her. And also, I was like 18 years old, I think. And my mother had cut out an article from a newspaper where the Beatles were launching a new company called Apple Records, and they were looking for songwriters and talent.
Okay.
So when I got there, I marched up, went down to Savile Row and went up and knocked on the door. It was on a Saturday, kind of a rainy afternoon. And, "Excuse me, sir, I just came. I have my guitar here, and I have songs I'd like to play for someone." And it was like this security guard guy, and he was very nice to me. And he said, "It really doesn't work that way." And I was so naive. And so he let me come in for a second to get out of the rain. And then, of course, I walked away just like completely dejected. My first real slap in the face of rock and roll reality, you know. But anyway, so I stayed and I got a job with a friend of mine working in this little shop in Soho, and so we used to go out and see bands at the Marquee on Bordeaux Street. We were just going there one night to kind of hang out and listen to music. And this band suddenly caught my attention because all of a sudden, all four guys in the band into their microphone saying, "Liar, liar," and four-part harmony. And I looked up and I was like, wow. And I can't remember if they were actually called Smile or if they were called Queen because I didn't really even know who they were that night. It was a couple of days later I found out. And now I've looked online and Googled it, and somebody actually posted the set list that they did from that night because they did Johnny Be Good. They did a Chuck Berry song. You know, they did a variety of stuff. But oh my gosh, were they really good, man? Wow.
Yeah, because when I was looking that up too, Jamie, I saw that they didn't really form until maybe as Queen in sometime in 1972.
That must have been new then, you know, because the Marquee Club is a small club.
Yeah, I looked at capacity, which said online it said it held 700 people, but I never know how accurate those estimates are.
Yeah, there wasn't 700 people. There wasn't many people there. I mean, we were standing on the dance floor and it wasn't even that crowded.
Okay.
But I just remember that just jumps out in my mind because I grew up in singing in a choir in church, and so I appreciated vocals and the fact that they could all sing that impressed me.
Yeah, that's a really cool story. At some point, maybe when you were in London, maybe not, 4 years later or so, you joined the new version of Steppenwolf, which I heard in an interview you were friends or friendly with at the time, the bass player in that band?
Yeah, Nick St. Nicholas. Well, let me go back. Before that, I moved back to Canada from London. Then I got a gig playing with these guys in Detroit in 1973, and the band was called Skip Van Winkle and the Night Rockers. And it was an interesting band because there was 2 drummers, 2 female singers, Marcy Levy that co-wrote ended up going on to co-write Lay Down Sally and sing that with Eric Clapton and be in his band, and a woman named Stony Reese, who then changed her name to Sean Murphy, and she ended up singing in Little Feat after Lowell George passed away. And that was a really, really fun band. And sadly enough, though, I got fired from that band, not because I wasn't good. It was a financial thing. It was a big band, and somebody in the band wanted more money than I got axed. Heartbroken again, slapped in the face by the music business. I went back to Canada and I toured around with my own band at the time, which I called Jamie James and the Shane Band, you know, opening for Canadian bands like April Wine and bands like that. And I came down to visit a friend to LA in 1975. And I decided to stay here because there was so many good musicians just floating around. And shortly thereafter, I met Nick St. Nicholas, who was the original bass player in the Steppenwolf. He was before that in a band called Sparrow, and he's of German origin, and his real name is Klaus Kasbaum, and he had met John Kay in Toronto, and John was from Germany. And as Nick tells me, they kind of chummed together and did music together. And anyway, so Nick and I, we put a band together called Pacific Coast Highway, which was with this great Canadian guitar player singer named Danny McBride, and it was a very good band. And we had different people coming to our rehearsals, like Richard Manuel from the band and stuff. And Dr. John was gonna Mac Rebenat, he wanted to take us into the studio to produce us because we had this wonderful piano player by the name of Jimmy Anger. Then Nick called me and said, "Jamie, I got an opportunity, through a series of legal means to go out as Steppenwolf without John Kay, won the right to use the name Goldie and I." Goldie McJohn was the organ player. I love Goldie, God rest his soul. And Kent Henry, who was the second guitar player that third guitar player that replaced Michael Monarch. I think there was a guy after that named George. I said, "Okay, Nick, well, I'll try it." I mean, those guys were in their 30s. I was 23, and I thought it would be a nice opportunity. But then Nick called me back and said, "Well, Goldie has a guitar player he wants to use, so you have to audition." And I said, "All right, whatever." And so I went to the audition. And now growing up in Canada, I knew all their stuff. I knew Sookie Sookie. I knew Rock Me Baby. I knew Don't Step on the Grass Sam. I knew Pusher Man. I knew Monster, right? Which is a very complex, wonderful recording. I just knew them because, I used to practice to those things. And of course, Goldie, he pulled out those songs and I knew them, Rock Me Baby. And I knew those songs. And everybody knew Born to Be Wild. And then so Goldie gets to Monster, and he's thinking he's gonna stump me, but I knew the whole thing. So I got that gig. And we toured around in 1977, what they called the New Steppenwolf World Tour '77. But after about 10 months or so, and they were doing 2 of my original songs in every show because songwriting is my love. But it just didn't start to feel like, for me as a songwriter and to express myself, a good vehicle for me to keep growing. And so I left it after just under a year.
Yeah, I could see that. That's an interesting reason.
Yeah, yeah.
I totally see that. So then you left and you formed your own band, right?
The
Yeah.
Kingbees.
So that band was about what, 4 years or so, Jamie?
Well, I started the band with my next door neighbor, Rex. He lived like his apartment was right next to mine in this little fourplex building. And then Michael lived up the street and on a street called Holly Drive, believe it or not. And at that time, I was looking for something new as a guitar player. I was kind of sick of playing, a double stack. Now, mind you, I'd been playing in the new Steppenwolf. I had a 1960 Les Paul through a Marshall. The tone every night was just off the hook, and I had a 57 Stratocaster. And, like all good guitar players, I ran out of money and I had to make a choice of which one of my 2 guitars to sell to like pay my rent and stuff. And so I let go of the Les Paul. Now that's an interesting story because this guy named Mike DeTemple, he had this Native American blanket from somewhere in Oklahoma, and Gary Busey wanted this blanket. And Gary Busey had just, I think, come out with the Buddy Holly story, so he had some moolah. And I needed to sell my guitar and I wanted to get a certain amount of money for it to, pay bills and then start covering costs like rehearsal costs and stuff for the Kingbees. And so we all went out. Mike came over and picked me up because I was so broke. I didn't even have a car anymore. And Mike came over and picked me up on a rainy day and we drove out to Malibu to Gary's place and just kind of had a fun powwow kind of afternoon. And we did a trade. And Gary wanted that blanket because I think it represented maybe something from his father's side of the family or something. I don't know. Can't remember exactly what he said. And so Gary got the blanket. Gary gave me the money and I gave the guitar to Mike DeTempo and we did a three-way kind of like exchange there. I hated letting go of that guitar. It's worth $1 million today. Last time I saw somebody was asking $1 million for it. But that's okay. That's how I started the Kingbees. And Michael lived next to Rex. And I saw drumsticks in his back pocket one day. He was a painter. He painted houses. And I said, "Are you a drummer, man?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Hey, I got these new songs. Come on in." And he sat down and just kind of played on his lap. And then I had met Michael at a party when I first moved down here, and I had his number, and I called. I said, "Michael, come on over. I got this drummer next door. Play bass. I've got these new songs I've been writing." And so he came over, and we just sat in my living room, like with no amps or anything like that, no drums, but I could feel the energy. Like I just liked what was happening.
Yeah.
And so that's how we got together.
And then you guys had a hit song called My Mistake, right?
Yeah, we got pretty lucky with the song My Mistake. I mean, I just received actually today from Carl Capriolio, the president of Olio. He has a friend that took pictures of the Kingbees' very first show at the Troubadour in Los Angeles on May 6th of 1979. And I got a couple of those copies today, and man, it blew my mind. But yeah, we rehearsed for a long time, like 10 months or 11 months before we even started to play. So from the winter of 77, no, from getting together to finally where everybody said, okay, we'll start rehearsing. That was late 77 and ended 78. And then we rehearsed 78. And then by the over Christmas period and stuff like that. And then we did some more rehearsal in 79. And then we got a show at the Troubadour on a Sunday night. And it just happened to go very well. There was a new magazine in LA called the LA Weekly, and they had a photographer and a writer there. And we got a great review, and they took a picture of us. And all of a sudden, man, just like every time we'd go and play all these little clubs around LA, there'd be a lineup of people. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that we had short hair and we used to wear little Colonel Sanders ties. And I played Buddy Holly stuff and simple stuff. We didn't call it rockabilly, and because it was before the Stray Cats, it was before MTV, it was before all that. I was just looking to do something different. As a guitar player, I said to myself, "No more single note solos, Jamie. You've had enough of that." All double string solos. And there used to be this mime in front of Groman's Chinese Theater on Hollywood Boulevard, and his real name is Eggman, and I lived right behind Groman's Chinese Theater on Orange Drive, and I used to walk down to Hamburger Hamlet to get some soup or whatever. And one day I started talking to him and he was telling me about, asking me about Buddy Holly when he found out that I was a guitar player. And then a couple days later, when I saw him, he had made a cassette of every Buddy Holly song. And I said, that's what I want to do on guitar. I want to do that kind of stuff where the chords are the lead instrument. You know what I mean? Like the chords, the strumming and the right hand says it all on the guitar. And so I learned all those, and Michael and Rex and I just started rehearsing for fun, like 4 nights a week. And Michael had a little rehearsal studio called Fortress Rehearsal, and we'd go in there and just do it and play. And yeah, it was just one of the really, it was just for the love of the music.
Yeah. Jimmy, you mentioned it was rockabilly before there was a label on it. And it just made me think of some bands that you take for granted now, their sound. Like when I first heard the Cars or the Police, I've never heard of anything like this at the time. And it was very unique, but now yeah, everybody knows their music. So that's interesting. And then I listened to a reunion concert, you guys, it's on YouTube of the Kingbees. And you had mentioned you toured with the Blasters.
No, no, that night we were filling in for the Blasters. They canceled.
Okay.
But we had played at the Blasters in the past. In LA, there was a small group of bands that used to, do shows together. And the Kingbees and the Blasters did a few shows together. And yeah, you would get on these bills at like the Starwood or the Whiskey or the Troubadour or the Roxy. I'm a big fan of Phil Elvin. I think he's definitely one of the purveyors of roots music in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I saw them once in the 80s. A buddy of mine is really into them. Yeah, it was a great show. And then you'd also had mentioned Anthony Kiedis.
No, no, Anthony's father, Blackie Dammit. Anthony was a kid at school because I'd be over at Blackie's, and Anthony and Flea, they used to go to Fairfax High School and they'd be on their skateboards, come home or something a couple of times when I was over there.
Okay.
That was before they were doing their band, I believe. But I went to one of their early rehearsals in the basement of a Chinese restaurant. I can't remember the name of it. And I remember saying to Anthony, "Yeah, the band is great. I love the energy, but you need to enunciate. I can't understand the thing you're saying." But anyway, Anthony's father was a character named Blackie Dammit, he called himself.
Yeah.
And he approached me after one of the King Bee shows, early shows, and he said, "Hi, I'm Blackie. I love you guys. I'm an actor, but I'd love to come and introduce you guys." And I said, "Oh, what would you say?" I would get up and just say simply, "Ladies and gentlemen, the perpetrators of rock and roll, the King Bees." And I said, "All right." So he used to come and do that at the shows, and it became a kind of a thing because he dressed all in black with, like white and black brogues. He looked like a gangster, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can Google him. We lost him too, man. It's sad. I feel bad for Anthony because, he basically grew up with his dad, and I don't know. I just thought Blackie, he was a wonderful. We got kind of close to him for a while there, and he was a wonderful, wonderful man.
Yeah, like I said, I heard you're talking about that a little bit in between songs on that live recording. You had mentioned as your disappointing concert, I didn't know if you wanted to talk about it,
Of course.
this concert at the Toledo Speedway or something.
It was called the Toledo Speedway Jam 2, so it was the 2nd annual one. Yeah, I mean, here's from my point of view. So we were playing around Los Angeles and doing our little thing, and I have my little 410 1958 Tweed Fender Bassman amp and my 57 Strat, and I was getting a sound. I was all about purity in those days, pure tone. I wanted the vocals to be authentic, the background vocals and all that stuff. So we're doing our little thing, and it's catching on because at that time, you have to understand it was different. You couldn't go to a nightclub in Los Angeles and hear what we were doing. And I think, honestly, people were maybe, like, burnt out a little bit on, like, I love Peter Frampton, don't get me wrong, but they were burned out on that kinda Donna Summer or Peter Frampton or that thing that, I don't know. There was, like, a new meanwhile, there was this new music thing happening. I don't know, man. I was too busy all the time just trying to hustle gigs for us and keep us rehearsing and keep the guys interested. Because, if your drummer and bass player don't stay interested, then you're screwed, you know what I mean? And the way to keep musicians there's 2 ways to keep musicians interested, and that's, good music and money, oh, well, 3 really, and gigs, but good music, good songs, money, and gigs. And if you get 2 out of 3 of those, you'll probably have a band. But 3 out of 3, you've definitely got a band. 1 out of 3, you're fucked. It's just that simple. Anyway, so yeah, the album came out in March for the Kingbees. We got a record deal on RSO Records, right? We had a lot of choices at that time. Because I remember we did a show at the Whiskey, and I came off stage, and there was 10 different business cards in the dressing room on the table, from Capitol Records, from Electro Asylum Records. I mean, 10, but I knew 2 people from my past that worked at RSO, and I thought, okay, that's the kismet. That's the thing. Robert Stigwood had worked with Brian Epstein, and I was a big fan of Brian Epstein. I read his book, Cellar Full of Noise, from the days when he managed the Beatles and Billy J. Kramer and things, and how he got the Beatles to headline on Ed Sullivan. And these stories were in his little book, a wonderful book. I don't know. I said, well, Stigwood had that. That's his pedigree with Epstein. And of course, to go on and manage Cream and Eric Clapton and the Bee Gees and whatnot. So, it felt like a no brainer to me at the time. So I went with them. Then we do the record, and the record comes out in March of 1980. And about 2.5 months goes by, and there's nothing. Yeah, K Rock was playing it here in town, which I was grateful for because they were the station in town that kind of broke new music. But anyway, all of a sudden, one day I get a phone call from the president of RSO, Al Corey, and he was really a very active guy in the music business. He had worked at Capitol and helped break the Beatles and all this stuff. And he goes, Jamie, you sitting down? You sitting down? I said, what do you mean? What's going on? I thought he was going to drop us from the label. No, sit down, sit down. I sat down. He goes, Jamie, we got a hit. We got a hit. I said, what do you mean we got a hit? My mistake. It's on heavy rotation, 3 stations in Detroit. You got a hit. Got a hit. We gotta go. You gotta go and do some big shows. I said, what do you mean big shows? And so then they put us on some of these big. So when Humble Pie canceled, this was with ZZ Top and AC/DC, and Sammy Hagar went on before we did, and he got bottled off stage. I think he got like 2 or 3 songs in. He got bottled up. So we're out on there to take Humble Pie's place, but they didn't make an announcement, I think, until that show. And by the way, I had forgotten about that until you guys, one of you guys did your research. Because when I read your thing that you sent me the other day, I went, oh man, I forgot. Because all these years I thought it was because we sucked. But actually, the truth is, when we walked out on stage, I could feel a little hostility because we were wearing Colonel Sanders ties. We had short hair. This was in Toledo in the Midwest with all these neo hippie kids that were drinking beer and don't know their ass from their elbow as far as rock and roll. So I said to Michael and Rex, okay, guys, we got to go right into My Mistake because it's a big hit in this area. So we go right into My Mistake, and most of the audience, as soon as I start playing the riff, da 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 da, most of the audience gets up. But there was a small cluster of people in the beginning that started throwing eggs and tomatoes and shit at us. I looked over, Michael had an egg dripping off his thing. And then somebody threw up a full bottle of whiskey, it looked like, and it didn't make the stage, and it hit this girl on the top of the head. And from where I was standing on stage, all I could see was this sheet of blood washed down her face, and that's it. I stopped. And I looked at the guy, I saw who threw the bottle, and I looked at it and I said, "Listen, you asshole, just come up here right now because I want to shove this fucking guitar down your throat. You don't know the first thing about rock and roll. You have just ruined this girl's week, maybe her month. You know, what are you coming for music and you're going to do something like that?" I was upset, man. So they dragged me off stage and we didn't even get a whole song. And that was before my mistake was finished.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's nuts. I was also reading that they were selling, I vaguely remember these things, these Olympia kegs. They're like round white orbs of beer.
There was a lot of beer there, man.
Well, it's like 5 gallons of beer and it has a tap on it. And I guess people were throwing those things around like when they were empty, of course.
I went down and tried to find that girl. All I remember is I saw the ambulance take her out of there, and I was really disheartened, man. I just thought, what are these fans these days coming to? Because as you saw, I loved going to music shows in the late 60s and early 70s. No one ever behaved like that, man. You know what I mean? It was a whole different thing. And I don't know, man, throwing stuff at bands or whatever, Yeah, we looked different. And I remember a couple of the guys from AC/DC came to our trailer to say, give their apologies, and someone from ZZ Top. And we got paid our full money, but it still didn't soften the blow. It was a tough blow, but we survived.
Yeah. So your most disappointing concert, you were the concert.
That's right. Yeah.
Hi, this is Doug, producer of Seeing Them Live. We're going to take a short break from this episode to hear from some of our friends.
Hey everybody, it's Ray the Roadie.
And this is Hollywood Mike
with the Rock and Roll Chicago podcast, coming to you from the Illinois Rock and Roll Museum on Route 66 in Joliet, Illinois.
where once a week we are interviewing local musicians and singer-songwriters, and the podcast itself covers a wide range of topics, including, but not limited to, the history of rock and roll in Chicago, the current state of the scene, and the challenges and opportunities facing musicians today.
So join us every Tuesday for a new exciting episode of the Rock and Roll Chicago podcast.
What was the last really great rock and roll book you read? How about a good rock and roll documentary? Well, that's why I started the Rock Talk Studio podcast, the place to go for recommendations of new rock and roll books and documentaries. Give me 20 minutes and the Rock Talk Studio podcast will get you caught up on the world of rock and roll books and docs from every possible angle and leave you with a no-doubt decision on where to spend your time and money. Want to know what to read next or which film to add to your watch list? Well, here comes all the top recommendations and hidden gems you don't want to miss. I'm your host, Big Rick. Join me for an exclusive look into what's hitting the shelves and the screens and get ready to rock your reading and viewing list. The Rock Talk Studio podcast, your ultimate guide to discovering the best new rock and roll books and documentaries.
Now, back to the show.
Jamie, so at some point, the Kingbees, they disband, I guess, right?
Yeah, 1981, before MTV.
And then you do a solo, an EP, right? The big one, I think it was called.
Yeah, I did an EP with this engineer producer by the name of Bob Margoloff, who was an engineer for, at the time, Michael Jackson's records. And I liked some of his ideas until I saw what he did with the songs. And then I realized it wasn't right. But the little label at the time, Vanity Records, was a subsidiary of some bigger label, and they kind of liked it. So I don't know, man. I don't know. It didn't do anything for me, So it was a 5-song EP, and I don't even think I have a copy of it. I haven't listened to all that old stuff in decades and decades, man.
And then was it around that time, then, Jamie, that you meet Harry Dean Stanton?
No, then I think a couple years goes by and I basically am just isolating at home in my apartment, trying to figure out what to do or whatever. And because still royalty checks were coming in from the Kingbees and stuff, so I didn't need to go out and do stuff or whatever. And I started dating this girl by the name of Kelly Coleman, who's also a wonderful musician. And her father happened to be an actor named Dabney Coleman. And Dabney was good friends with Harry Dean. And we were over at Kelly's dad's, Dabney's, for a July 4th. I guess this goes back to 86, maybe. Yeah. And in walks this kind of disheveled looking guy. And I thought to myself, look at that. That's very nice of Dabney to share his success 9 to 5 had been a big hit for him. And look, he's sharing his success with this homeless guy because I had no idea who Harry Dean Stanton was. Yeah, I didn't watch TV in those days. I was too busy all the time. Or go to movies. I didn't do that. Wasn't my life then. So I sit down and we start talking, and he asked me what I do. I said, I play guitar. He goes, I play some guitar too. And we started talking. And I was curious, like, because Dabney lived way up in the foothills at the top of Brentwood. So I don't know how Harry got there because I could tell by the way he was dressed. He was next to homeless, basically. And so I looked at him and I said, by the way, Harry, I didn't know that the buses ran on July 4th. Did the buses run today? Is that how you got here? He started laughing. He thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. He went, Dabney, your son-in-law he thought we were married, but we weren't married. He goes, your future son-in-law just asked me if I got here on a bus. And Harry liked really a good sense of humor. So anyway, from that moment on, we just kind of became kindred spirits. And I had been doing a song. I put a version of the Kingbees back together with a new bass player and drummer by the name of Danny O'Brien and Ricky Pelton on bass. And boy, Danny could really sing. Those guys could sing. And so I was doing a stint down at the Lighthouse on Hermosa Beach, 2 Saturdays a month, 5 sets a night down there. And in the summer, I used to do the first Saturday and the third Saturday, and then the following Sunday afternoon for the beach crowd. And it really made me a much better singer doing all that. And I got to do any kind of stuff. I could do all my original stuff. I could do everywhere from Marvin Gaye's Heard It Through the Grapevine to Marty Robbins' El Paso. And we used to do El Paso, and it tore the house down because I did all 12 verses with 3-part harmony, and people went nuts. Oh, Kelly brought Harry down to the Lighthouse to see me play, and he saw me do El Paso. So one of the next times we got together, I said, what do you want to play? I was up at his house with a couple of acoustics, and he goes, let's do El Paso. And so we did it, and I let him sing it, and I said, that sounds great. Well, then I got a call from this guy, Len Fagan, who was a booker at the Coconut Teaser, and he said, listen, Jamie, Slim Jim Phantom and Lee Rocker, the bass player and drummer from the Stray Cats, they want a singer, a guitar player for some shows. And I said, oh, great, let me go. So we hooked up and we put a show together. And in the show, I said, guys, I just got to do El Paso. And we were playing over at this club called the Central, which became the Viper Room, Johnny Depp's place. Johnny bought it. And Harry was there, one of our first shows, and he wanted to get up and play. And I said, what do you want to do? And he said, El Paso. I said, okay, great, let's do El Paso. And while we did the performance, he sang an extra verse. So in the dressing room there, I said, dude, did you make that verse up on the spot? Because that was clever. He goes, no. He goes, that was in the song. I said, no, it wasn't. Because I had the 45. I said, no, it wasn't. He goes, yes, it was. And that was our first argument. I said, you're wrong. And he said, you're wrong. And so I went down to that place that sold sheet music on Sunset Boulevard. I can't remember the name of it now. And I bought the sheet music, and man, there it was. And Harry was right. It was in the sheet music, but it was too controversial, so they wouldn't put it on the single. And so right away, my respect for Harry went through the roof, and he and I started doing music, and we did a band together for almost 10 years, man, playing every week.
Yeah, it was called Harry Dean Stanton and the Cheap Dates.
No, that was a little bit later. That was about 5 years later when my friend Slim Jim had the idea of, because he was very close with Skunk Baxter, and Skunk loved playing pedal steel. And so I said, Harry, we get Slim to play drums. And yeah, so we did a few shows, and that was a lot of fun. But the other thing I did with Harry, that was apart from the Cheap Dates. The Cheap Dates was kind of interim thing that we did. Yeah, it was a brief thing for like maybe 6 months or so.
And I heard in an interview while you were playing a gig with Harry on Halloween of 2000, Dennis Quaid was in the audience, and you invited him up on stage or something?
Yeah, no, what happened is that Harry one time said to me, listen, man, you want to go to an opening of a movie? And I said, not really. He goes, come on with me, man, because we'll sit in the back row because I want to go out in the lobby and smoke or whatever. I said, all right. And when we were there, and then the last minute, just before the movie's about to start, this guy sat down next to Harry, and it was Dennis. And I didn't know Dennis, and I didn't know anything about his movie career or anything at all. And then so that we go through that. And then a little time shortly thereafter, Harry and I had a regular gig. We used to do midnight every Saturday night at the Mint down on Pico Avenue. And I get there, I go up to Harry's. Our ritual was I'd go to Harry's before a show. and he and I would warm up. And then I'd grab his guitar for him, because he was getting older then. And then I'd drive down. He came down a little later, or sometimes he'd ride with me, or sometimes he'd take his own car. And so I went down this time on my own, and I got there a little early to go in. And there was Dennis. I recognized him from the movie. I said, "Hey, man, I can't remember your first name, but you're a friend of Harry's at the movie thing." It was Dennis. Yeah, great, man. And when we started talking until Harry got there out in the parking lot, and he was telling me he was also kind of a musician, he liked to play and stuff. And we talked about things, and we're about the same age. I'm maybe a little older than he is. And we had a lot of the same songs we liked from the 1960s and influences and whatnot. And so when we're doing our show, and I asked him ahead of time, I said, "Listen, do you want me to ask Harry, you want to come up and do a song or two with this band?" And he goes, "No, no, no, not tonight, no." And that we were playing our show, and then I feel somebody tapping my leg in the middle of a song, and it was Dennis. And he's like, looking, "Hey, man, I think I'd like to get a piece of this, because it was a lot of fun with Harry. We used to get great audiences and a lot of fun. And so I said, "Harry, Dennis wants to get up." And he said, "Okay." And so Dennis got up, and we jammed, and he and I clicked. And then after the show, somebody comes up behind me and gives me a hug and whispers in my ear, "Man, that's the most fun I've had in months." I didn't realize he was going through a divorce at the time. And he said, "When are you doing your next show?" And I said, "Well, Mondays I kind of do a frustrated little jazz blues thing at this little club on Hollywood Boulevard." And Dennis was there before I got there Monday night, and he played the whole set with us that night. That was not with Harry. That was with a different thing that I was doing. Yeah, and that's how we clicked. And then we ended up putting a band together. I got the guys that play with me now, Tom Walsh on drums, and Tom Mancias, also known as Tom Slick, on bass, and Ken Stangy on keyboards. The Sharks were born. Dennis wanted a name for the band, and he and I talked it over, and he said, "Maybe we won't use the name Dennis Quaid, just maybe DQ." I said, "That's great, man, because, this, we don't, your name is an actor." And I still didn't know how popular he was, but his enthusiasm was wonderful, and his taste in music was very similar to mine. And I didn't know he had done Jerry Lee Lewis in the movie, and I didn't know any of that stuff. And I knew he had his son, Jack, and Jack was, maybe 8 or 9 years old at the time, and it was Shark Week, and Dennis was looking for a name, and Jack said, "Hey, Dad, how about the Sharks?" And Dennis said, "All right, that's great." Well, so we called it the Sharks because Jack Quaid, it was Shark Week, so how could you not call it the Sharks? And we ended up doing that band right up until about 2020, man, until the pandemic. We ended up doing that band for almost 20 years, man.
Yeah, long time. Maybe this be a good transition then, Jamie, into your current album with the Sharks, basically, right?
Yes.
From what I was reading or listening to an interview or something, you wrote a lot or started to write songs during the pandemic, and you came up with about 30 songs, was it? And then brought them over to these guys, and they liked what they heard, or maybe it was you picked 10 songs and brought them over to these guys and the Sharks, and you guys decided to do an album.
Yeah. Well, what happened is just before the pandemic, the Sharks did a show up in Telluride, Colorado, up the mountains, and in the winter, and in February, in fact, of 2020. And I don't know, I noticed I was having a lot of trouble just catching my breath. And after the show, we got there a day early, so we were going to do the concert the next day. So on the Friday night, something didn't feel right, and I was actually afraid to go to sleep because I could hear the blood rushing through the vein of my neck and everything on the pillow. So I stayed awake until I could call my doctor on a Saturday morning. I had his cell phone. I called him early, about 6 a.m., and he said, "Don't worry, Jamie, it's probably just altitude sickness, And I said, "But this is weird, man, because I'm really having a hard time catching my breath." And I couldn't make it from the door of my suite to the elevator without stopping about 3 times. And so anyway, I bought all these oxygen canisters for the show that night at the doctor's suggestion. And we got through the show. And then the next day, my dear friend, God rest his soul, Rusty, who was like our guitar tech and a very, very close friend of mine for a long time, and would drive everywhere with me because I really don't like to fly, And when we got back down to sea level and got back to Los Angeles, it was not any different. Well, I got back to town on the Sunday. I went to see my doctor on the Monday. And then he got me an appointment to see a cardiologist on that Friday, which was February the 14th. And the cardiologist did an angiogram and said, "That's it. You can't go home. We're going to schedule you for the next surgery. You need at least a triple bypass." And, I had no choice in the matter. And of course, by the time the surgeon got in there to repair my heart, I ended up needing a quadruple bypass because my heart was 90% blocked. And so he told me that the heart that he held in his hand was only going to be good for about another 3 to 5 days, and I would have been dead before I hit the floor. So it saved my life. And I remember, this is the true story, when they were wheeling me in to the surgery, which was in the basement of the hospital, so the last thing before the lights went out, I just said, "God, you get me through this, and I promise you I'm going to use my talent and my hard work and my dedication to get back to songwriting," because I always felt that was my kind of destination. That's what saved me from becoming a criminal or, some kind of whatever, man, back when I was a teenager. The guitar gave me focus in life because my parents had gotten divorced and I was becoming a menace. I would have been a delinquent, I'm sure of it. But instead, I had this beautiful thing and I started writing songs. I started learning, going to the library and studying music theory and just learning chords. And I taught myself. I've never had a lesson. And so that's what I did. I got through the surgery. Well, then the pandemic was because the surgery was February 17th and then the shutdown, closed down thing, lockdown happened in March. And so I took up harmonica. So I practiced harmonica every day and I started writing songs every day. And I have a teenage daughter that was in school every day. And I thought, if my kid can sit in the desk, I can sit here and get shit done. And so I did it like 5 days a week. And lo and behold, things just started happening. And grooves started coming and lyrics started coming and melodies started coming. And there we go. Now, when it came to getting the guys, we used to make very good money with Dennis, but I didn't have money to pay these guys. So I said, "Guys, I can't pay you anything, but I've got these songs you want to go in and record. I want to record these songs at the studio called Robot Kitten Studios with this wonderful engineer named Paul Rossler." And they weren't that interested because, like I said, one of the three things, you've got to have gigs, you got to have good music, you have money. If you don't have money, a lot of the time that's good enough. And then they weren't really interested. And then I ended up somehow playing one of the songs on my phone for somebody at this thing. And the bass player, Tom, was walking by. He goes, "What's that?" And I go, "Oh, this is one of my new songs." I was the song Septuagenarian Blues, which will be out on the album I'm excited about. And Tom said, "Oh, man, that sounds good. I'd love to come over and start learning." So he started coming over 2 days a week to learn all the songs on the bass because I'm a big believer in pre-production. Have your shit together, man, before you go in the studio. And then you buzz like a buzz saw, you just cut through it. And then Tom was willing to, he had as a room out in his house, Tom, the drummer, Tom Walsh. And we went out and rehearsed. And I remember we took a break and we went outside and his wife had been listening at the door and she said, "Oh, Jamie, I love your new songs." And that kind of sealed it because when one of the wives says, "Love the new songs," the deal is done. There's no turning back there, right? So that was it. I knew, okay. And Ken, the keyboard player, he was actually on the road at the time with Paul Anka, so he couldn't be there for that first session that day. So we did the rhythm parts, and I sang. I kept all my scratch vocals. So we rehearsed a couple more times, and then we went in the studio and recorded the 10 basic tracks. And I wanted to do more, but Tom was ready to kill me, the drummer. He said, "What, are you kidding? I said, "Come on, Tom, one more, man. We're smoking. Come on, then." So we got at least these 10 done.
Yeah, and I heard too, Jamie, which I found amazing. Well, a couple things. You sang it live,
That's correct.
played it live, I guess.
Yes. I set up in the control booth with Tom, the bass player. Tom, the drummer, was set out in the drum room, and I had my harmonica rack on and one of my acoustic guitars, and I just played and sang live. And because I've been doing it at home, like, writing these songs. So it was like no problem for me. And I mean, I could do it right now for you, but I'm not really set up for it here. Now, the only thing was on a couple of songs, I wasn't crazy about the harmonica tone on the rack. So I did go back in and redo a couple harmonica things where I could hold the harmonica to have more control. But we kept all the scratch vocals from that first day. Yeah, all those vocals are from the live performance.
Because Doug and I had a little listening party at his house the other day. We listened to the whole album, and a couple things struck me. One was your voice, and you have that song, the Septuagenarian
blues. Yeah. Yeah.
Your voice just sounds great on all those songs. And I thought, did you condition your voice?
Well, I sing here at home every day. I've been on a kick this last couple months of learning the whole Antonio Carlos Jobim bossa nova repertoire. So I've been doing that. And I go through different phases. I love to learn all the different things. Jimmy Rogers, the singing brakeman from the 1920s, or Robert Johnson. I went through and learned his proper on the guitar, like his repertoire at one point. And so I just do that for my own existence, my own therapy, as I love to study other musicians and sing and play their stuff. So would you like me to give you a sample right now?
Yeah, let's do it.
This is a song called Septuagenarian Blues. I gave up drinking in my early 30s. I put down smoking at age 42. I quit my gambling when I reached 55 and stopped my dogging when I met you. Now I'm an old guy from the 60s singing Septuagenarian Blues. I visit my doctor nearly twice a week. I do my best to stay off of my feet. Eat frozen dinner from a fold-up tray. And if you ask me, it's a beautiful day. I'm just an old guy from the 60s singing Septuagenarian Blues. I got the Septuagenarian. I sing the Septuagenarian. I got the Septuagenarian. I'm just an old guy from the 60s singing Septuagenarian Blues. Thinking about the birds and the bees, or jumping and skipping and climbing up trees. I'm getting used to these old aches and pains, and walking around with my walking cane. I'm just an old boy from the 60s singing Septuagenarian Blues. I'm just a Septuagenarian. I've got the Septuagenarian. I've got the Septuagenarian. I'm just an old boy from the 60s singing Septuagenarian Blues. Wait till I'm 80.
Thanks, Jamie. We really appreciate that. That's an awesome add-on to the interview.
So, Jamie, I was just wondering, in the early days, the concerts that you saw before you were a musician, was there one show where you went to it, you were so blown away, you said, yes, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life?
No, you know what? It wasn't a show. It was a rehearsal in Woodstock, Ontario in the mid-60s. One day I was out in the front yard playing. I was probably about maybe, I don't know, maybe 11. I think Love Me Do had just come out by the Beatles, so it was around that time. And I heard these live drums coming from a basement, 3 houses down from my mom's house. And I ran down there and crawled into the little crawl area in front of the basement window, and I watched, and there was these older guys with long hair, and they were like kind of longish hair, and there was a guy playing drums and a guy playing guitar and another guy playing bass. I recognized the 4 strings on the bass because I was interested in playing upright bass. And on the drum head, it said the Kingbees. And I remember running home, running downstairs. My mom was doing the laundry in the basement of one of those tub washing machines. And I said, Mom, I've got it figured out. Because, people used to always ask, you'd have aunts and stuff, what do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to do when you grow up, right? I didn't want to say fireman or policeman. I said, I know what I want to do when I grow up, Mom. I want to be a king bee. Because they started playing and poof, it blew my mind, man. And I got that excitement that you get. You ever have that where you're walking up to a concert or you're a little late and you can already hear, or you hear the opening band or something, and you get that excitement, that buzz, it gets your blood boiling. And that's what happened that day. Yeah. So that's very clear in my history there.
That's a cool story. Yeah, Jamie, thanks again for being on Seeing Them Live. And closing, do you have any final thoughts, or where can we find this album?
It's not going to be pressed into vinyl just yet. So it's going to be on all the digital platforms, Apple Music, Amazon, Spotify.
Are you guys going to be touring, Jamie, at all? Playing any gigs?
There's no plans right now that are set. I'm willing to go wherever the songs take me, but honestly, it's like David and Goliath, like Carl Capriolio. I mean, his enthusiasm from Oglio Records has been so wonderful, but it's a small label, but his enthusiasm is wonderful. And we just seem to be kind of picking up like a snowball going downhill. It's just kind of picking up steam. So I would venture to say that this could culminate in some live shows. Yes, for sure.
That would be awesome. Is there any place where people can follow you or anything, Jamie?
Well, probably Oglio Entertainment. I think they have a website because unfortunately, I'm just not a social media person.
Can you spell that for us?
The G is silent. It's Oglio entertainment.com.
We can put that in the show notes. This has been great, Jamie. We really appreciate you coming on, and check out the new album, Straight Up. And thanks again for being on Seeing Them Live.
Charles, Douglas, man, it's been a joy. I had no idea I was going to enjoy myself so much. Man, I just love what you're doing. I love your question formats. It makes me feel like you go back and see an abbreviated period of time, your whole romantic involvement with music, because musicians weren't always musicians, right? So I love that you go back and are interested in that part of it. Like, who did you see and what turned you on and all that?
You're going to have to start working on that memoir, Jamie.
Yeah. Well, if I told you half of the experiences, I know you wouldn't believe me.
I bet you have some other stories. Yeah, thanks again. And we look forward to watching what else develops in the future.
Hey, guys, fingers crossed. Guys, have a great day.
That's a wrap for our show. I want to thank today's guests for sharing their concert stories with us. Make sure to check out our show notes at seeingthemlive.com for links to websites, photos, and other artifacts mentioned in the show. I also want to thank my producer, Doug Florzak. The theme music for the show was composed by Doug and is featured on his album, Flagstone. If you have a concert story you'd like to share on our podcast, please visit our website and click on Become a Guest in the main menu. Then fill out the form and click the Submit button. If you seem like a good fit for the show, we'll contact you via email. I guess it's time to head for the exits. We'll see you next time on Seeing Them Live.